Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Crucible. Not doing the initial startup like I usually do because we're dual broadcasting to both YouTube channels at the moment. What I want you to do is move out of the regular Crucible YouTube channel and move over to the Crucible Limited, which is broadcasting live right now. So head over to the Crucible Limited. That's where you're going to be able to watch this debate. I'm only going to be directing traffic for about 5 minutes, and then this stream on the regular channel will self-destruct. So 4 minutes. 4 minutes to get over to the Crucible Limited to watch this debate. That's where it's going to be happening. It's where everybody's going to be able to see it. Not going to be able to watch it from the main channel. So I think we're only like, I don't know, 40 watch hours or something ridiculously small for me being able to monetize the alt channel anyway, right? So make sure you move off of the main channel, move into the limited channel. Why a new platform? Because the stupid frog-kecking bastards like to mass report everything that I do. That's why there's a fucking other channel. So anyway, until the strike from the false flags fall off, we'll be going from the Crucible Limited. So I also got a tongue lashing. Apparently, Femoid was very upset with me. I don't know the lore. Okay, I don't know the lore. Anyway, 3 minutes. Make sure you get over to the Crucible's Limited channel. The link is in the description if you're on the main channel. It's right at the top. Can't miss it. Can't miss it. Okay. Is there a membership yet? There's not a membership on the alt channel yet, but you can still become a member of the main channel. We still get all that revenue, and you still have access to all of the content that members can enjoy. Also, all that stuff will be up soon on Locals. You can check all that out there. I'll give a coupon code for everybody who's a member. They actually just recently authorized that, so we're all good there too. 2 minutes. And then this message will self-destruct on the main channel. Get off the main channel. Click the link at the top. Go to the Crucible Limited. That's where this debate's going to happen. Just directing traffic. That's it. Only going to be directing the traffic for 2 more minutes. The debater's already in-house. We want to get this debate started, obviously. Sit, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny, I must admit. But yeah, get off the main channel, go to the Crucible Limited, click the link at the top. That broadcast will still be there as an ad, but nothing more than that. So make sure that you click the link at the top. That'll take you right to the limited channel. That's where you want to be. Literally, you got 1 minute left. That's all you get. 1 more minute, and then this self-destructs. So get over there. Also, woman, bring me down a vodka and seltzer. You know? Do it. There's a rad femme in the background. She needs to see the subservient. I'm kidding. I'm obviously fucking kidding. I can see her shaking her head at me in the background and shit. That was a funny joke. It was a funny fucking joke. I know you think it's funny, but I know you do, Femoid. Don't lie. It's fucking funny. Anyway. All right. 30 seconds. This message will self-destruct on the main channel. 30 seconds, guys. What's the limited? What's this limited shit? Like I said, we get fucking mass flagged by Groiper scum constantly. So we using our alt channel till the strikes fall off. I understand lots and lots of people are used to the Crucible's main channel. They helped me build the fucking channel. They're probably fucking pissed off that hundreds of videos, including ones that are in, had to be removed and moved over to Rumble. I get that. Nothing I can do about it. Head over to the Crucible Limited. This message is now self-destructing. All right. And we should still be live on the Crucible Limited. Somebody give me a 1 in chat if you can see us okay. Still rolling strong. All right, good deal. So now we'll do the whole fucking thing like we're supposed to. We'll do the whole stupid fucking intro, the whole show like we're supposed to do the show. So Here we go. So instead of the pissed off, angry, middle-aged man voice, I'll switch over to the mod voice real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Crucible. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson. Tonight we have a fantastic debate for you between Femoid and Ethan, now going by Ethan instead of Mouthy Infidel. Haven't seen him here in his most powerful form, apparently, which is as Ethan instead of Mouthy Infidel. Longtime contributor to the Crucible. He did a lot of early debates with us. We appreciate that very much. He reached out, wanted to do this one. We were happy to host it. Both the debaters are backstage. We're going to get moving. And we're back, just setting the mood with a little tune in the background. Appreciate both of you guys coming on so much this fine evening. Remember, everybody out there in Crucible land, you can send a super chat. I'll have the Dono chat link pinned up at the top momentarily. This channel's not monetized yet. It probably will be in the next day or two. But if you want to send a super chat, you can send it in that way. We'll be taking callers tonight, just like we do every regular debate. Before we move into the debate, there were some ground rules set back. There's probably going to be a little bit more intravenous moderation. If need be, expect both the debaters to adhere to the moderation. Ethan, how are you tonight?
I'm doing okay.
Great. Thanks for coming on tonight. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you very briefly? Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I make content occasionally. Sometimes I do debates. Sometimes I do other things. But my YouTube channel is just Confronting Capital, so you can find me there. My website where I post my writing is also Confronting Capital, but unfortunately you can't access my writing unless you are willing to pay me like $5 a month. So yeah, that's basically all of my important social media platforms.
Are you still a fucking communist, Ethan?
I'm a socialist.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. I don't know. I can't keep up. You know, people change that shit like they change their hats. Femoid, how are you tonight?
Okay.
I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Am I saying it correctly? Is it femoid, femoid? What is it?
Femoid, tomato.
Okay. Fair enough. Why don't you do the same thing? Tell everybody where they can find you. I know that you were banned on Twitter. I was sorry to see that.
Yeah. They found me. The TRAs found me. I'm Femoid on YouTube and Twitch, soon to be Kick, and I just released my first video essay on gender today, so there's that. It's like my first little body of work. that I've put out. And yeah, I'm a feminist. I consider myself fairly sympathetic to radical feminism, although I don't align completely. And yeah, that's me.
All right, appreciate that very much.
Yeah, that's me.
Hang on 1 second. I'm sorry. Appreciate that, Kurt. There we go. There was a echo sign. Echo happening on my end there for a second. Let's see what the fuck is going on here. There we go. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Anyway, we're going to let the debate get started. You have 7 minutes on the clock. Ethan starting. You don't have to use the entire 7 minutes, but I will have the timer in the background. It's your open, but I'm going to let you close last. So go ahead with your opening statement whenever you're ready.
Sure. I didn't actually prepare an opening statement. I guess my plan was just to kind of see, explore some things Lav said, see which things she wants to explore. I mean, I guess I can just broadly lay out what my positions are on trans issues. I think that, trans women are women, trans men are men, etc. I think that, consistent definitions for things like man and woman can be given that are broadly trans inclusive. I don't think that trans people suffer from any sort of delusion or false belief or anything like that. And I think that society ought to go in the direction of being more accepting of trans people and sort of accepting them into the categories that trans people identify with. I think we talked a little bit in the back about what we wanted to sort of talk about first. And I think we settled on, we could talk about this claim that like trans people are delusional. And I guess it would sort of be up to you to make like the affirmative case for that. And then I can respond to what you say or sort of why you think that, because I don't know exactly why you think that. So yeah, I guess that's all I really have to say for right now.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for that, Ethan. Appreciate it. Femoid, whenever you're ready, you have 7 minutes on the clock as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm sort of a gender identity atheist. I believe that gender has been an oppressive tool used by the patriarchy to oppress men and women, but more heinously women. And that's where my focus is. And yeah, I think that gender identity and ideology is really regressive. And I think that in the technological age, we've moved past needing gender identity or ideology. I consider myself a dualist. So I know that, language is important to the way that we interact with each other. But I also believe in physical and material reality. And I believe that, there are certain laws that exist to protect females, which are the smaller, weaker sex. And so, yeah, I think I'm really focused on legislative definitions that have applicableness in our current political and cultural zeitgeist, more so than getting caught up in like the philosophical reasons as to why people think trans women are women. And yeah, I'm willing and able to engage with the fantasy of trans women being women, but I don't think that we should adopt it into our legislation. I don't think that we should protect a subjective state, which is gender identity. We don't protect any other facets of human identity. Yeah, but overall, yeah, I think that's it. Sorry, I didn't prepare anything either.
That's totally fine. I'm just going to give you the same time I would give anybody who came on the channel participating in a debate. So if that's your wrap up, that's fine, and we can just kind of move right into this. So I'm sure you both would prefer that. Ethan, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, I guess the first thing I want to stick on is like there's this claim that like trans people are delusional. You also claimed in your opening that there's like a fantasy going on. So like, I guess, why do you think that? Like, what false belief is it that trans people, because I'm guessing you think that trans people are like necessarily delusional. It's not just like contingently the case that all trans people happen to have some delusion, but rather being like, it's constitutive of being trans that you're delusional. So I guess like I'm wondering, what is the false belief that trans people hold? Why do you think trans people necessarily hold some false belief?
So gender dysphoria, I would say would be like akin to the delusion I talk about, like the belief that you are in the wrong body or that you were supposed to be a different sex, I think is a delusion. Um, yeah, I think. What are your, what do you think?
Yeah, I guess like in the sense of like it depends on what we mean by like supposed to be. I don't think that it's constitutive of being trans that, you know, you have some belief that like it's objectively the case that you ought to have been born into a different body or something like that. I just take it that, you know, in order to be trans, you generally have to, you know, like you have some sort of internal sense of gender identity. You have certain desires. You want to be recognized as the gender that doesn't correspond to the sex that you were assigned at birth. You have, in order to have dysphoria, which you mentioned, I just take it that that means that you have like a certain amount of psychological distress relating to the gender that you were categorized as.
I would agree with all of those things. I would say that gender identity is sort of like a two-pronged sword in the way that I actually think that the real victims of gender ideology are usually trans people. Like I think I want to decimate gender roles and idealize stereotypical roles for the same reason why trans people think that they should change themselves or mutilate their bodies or do whatever they need to do in order to feel like themselves, even though that they're changing themselves. I consider myself a gender abolitionist. So I'm interested in how you would define gender identity.
So I guess like I just take it that gender identity is just defined as being basically like a set of internal inclinations, basically on my construal, something like desire-like states, to be categorized in certain ways, to express yourself in certain ways, to be referred to using certain pronouns, etc. And so I guess like, you know, on that note, like if that's a sort of construal of gender identity that we both sort of broadly accept, in order to have a gender identity that doesn't correspond with the sex that you were assigned at birth, like what false belief do you think is like entailed by that?
Well, sex essentialism. So I believe that you do not need to be a different sex in order to express the way that you'd like to express. So calling a trans woman a woman doesn't make a lot of sense. A man is a man, a male is a male, and they can express themselves and present however they wish to, and it would still not change their biology, and therefore has no real life utility in the real world. And again, like I want to move away from legislating subjective human states because I don't think it makes a lot of sense.
Sure. So you said that you don't need to be a man to express yourself as a man. I mean, I could agree with that, but do you think that the belief that you need to be a man in order to express yourself as a man is somehow like constitutive of being a trans man, for instance?
Well, so I would like to really, part of my platform is that I really want to get rid of like this act like a man, act like a woman thing. Normal people plot, normal distribution of personality traits across the board, masculine, feminine, what we deem as those things. And I don't think that it is conducive to a post-technological society in which is progressive to harp on those things and then legitimize stereotypes.
Yeah, so that might be the case. And I mean, we can get into certain, you know, like normative questions surrounding like, you know, how ought we, you know, conceive of these, how ought we use these concepts, what definitions ought we use? And it might be the case that, you know, someone who's trans, generally speaking, has some view that they think that we ought to define man or woman in a way that sort of describes them. And you might disagree with that sort of prescription that trans people often suggest. But I don't think that, I guess what I'm getting at is that I don't think that this is all, like, it seems like what you've given me so far is you think that, like, normatively speaking, trans people tend to use a definition that you think they ought not use, that you think we as a society should get away from, right? But like them using a definition in that way that you think is like normatively bad doesn't entail that they have like a false belief of any sort. It might entail that they've done something wrong, that they're doing something like immoral, something they ought not do. But like, you know, like wrong acts, I think, are distinct from like false beliefs. Like if I have a friend who like murders someone, it's not like they have some false belief. They just did something they ought not have done.
Sure. Well, I consider the false belief, I consider it to be a false belief that you, again, this is not all trans people. So I certainly believe that there are trans people who don't even necessarily believe that you need to have gender dysphoria. And like I said, I will engage in the fantasy. I will engage in the fiction. I have plenty of trans friends. I use their correct pronouns, but they also understand that like they are, you know, men, they're not women. They, you know, they understand reality and they understand that they're not, you know, they're not going to go into women's spaces. They're not going to go into women prisons. They're not pushing for it. They think that trans women are trans women. And that's under the umbrella of male and not under the umbrella of female or woman. And then I believe that the false belief would be gender dysphoria. So the mental disorder or the, you know, the gender dysregulation or the sex dysregulations, like sex dysphoria, would be a false belief about yourself that you are supposed to be or that you should be a different sex.
So I think that I mean, there are like different sort of things I could say in response to that. Some of them are like more sort of niche and philosophical than others. So like I will just avoid some of the points about like, you know, whether there are truths about, you know, what we should do, or whether it makes sense to talk about statements about what should happen or what we should do in sort of truth apt terms. But like, I guess what I'll just say is like, if the like, so I take it that gender dysphoria is just generally speaking defined as having like some significant level of psychological distress as a result of the lack of correspondence between, you know, your sex and your gender. But I don't think that like feeling distress as a result of that implies that you have any sort of belief that you should have been born, you know, as the other sex or something like that. Like someone might not commit to a claim as strong as that. They might just say, I'm not making any statements about what should have happened. I'm just saying that like the gender that I was assigned causes me significant distress.
Sure, but I think that most people would then feel gender dysphoria. I think most women especially are very unhappy with the gender that has been imposed on them. So there's varying levels. So if it's just gender, if you're unhappy that you're supposed to be working in the fields, doing hard labor as a man, that is a form of gender dysphoria. When it becomes to the point where you want to transition into another gender role, I think that that's regressive. I think that we've probably moved past something like that, and surely we can all just get rid of the pink and blue box. You know, there are certain differences between the sexes, which is that 90% of one can kill 90% of the other with their bare hands. And so I really, when we talk about like gender and sex, I try to really, as a focal point, focus on like evolutionary biology. Just as like, because I don't care, again, like I said, and I've said this for a billion times, I don't care if a man wants to look exactly like a female. If he wants to look exactly like a female and he passes, I'll probably call him, you know, a she, and you know, that's that. What you don't know, you know, doesn't really affect you, right? It's like Schrodinger's sex. But I think that we ought to still have laws protecting the biologically weaker sex. So I don't even if we give this like gender thing merit, because I know that it is very real to, I don't know if you know any of my story. I was at the beginning stages of transition when I was like 13, 14. I was a gender nonconforming queer person, identified as a lesbian, and then didn't really know, but I knew that I have autism, so I have pretty masculine traits. And I started binding, and I started, you know, to believe that I wasn't a woman. And then I I was sent to a residential treatment center, which ended up being sort of like a religious cult. So they beat it out of me. But I'm, you know, in some ways I'm glad that they did, though, because now it really opened my eyes to where like a woman can be anything, like a female can be anything, and a male can be anything. We can express whatever we want to express, and it should stay that way. And in giving these gender roles any merit is extremely regressive. I mean, that's what Andrew wants to do. Andrew likes gender roles. He thinks that they're super cool. You know, Republicans and conservatives love gender roles, and for some reason, so do trans people. And I just think that that's really interesting. And I think that it's really interesting how the left has adopted gender roles and given them many sort of merit and sort of partake in this biological or gender essentialism where we can just opt out of our sex or the way that people view us. It's very strange to me. It doesn't make a ton of sense.
Sure. So, I mean, we can talk about, you know, like the normative questions about, you know, how should we carve out these categories? You know, how should we use words like man and woman and so on? I guess what I'm just trying to get at right now is like, even assuming that trans people necessarily, in calling themselves women and in so doing, like using some, you know, even if they believe that they are women or something like that.
Well, they believe that they're women because they want to perform a set of, usually because they want to perform a set of stereotypes and then go into the social caste of women, which is subordinate.
Sure, but
which
like,
is, I think, is really regressive and oppressive to women. And giving that merit, saying that you can opt into womanhood by performing a set of impositions on females feels very inappropriate.
So, sure. So they may be doing something immoral, and we can talk about that. But do you think like doing something immoral entails that they have some sort of delusion, that they're under some false belief? Because like, if we agree that like to have
I don't think it's a false belief to want to go into another. Again, the false belief is thinking that you're supposed to be something else. The false belief of not wanting to perform in your gender or liking something isn't a false belief.
Okay,
like wanting to wear a dress, wanting to get breast implants, I don't think that's a false belief. But doing those things because you believe that you're supposed to, that you were born in the wrong body would be a delusion.
Okay, so do you think that it's constitutive of being trans that you have such a belief? Like, do you think that you can be okay? So you think you can be trans without holding the belief that you ought to have been born into a different body?
Yes.
Okay, so and if we agree that you don't have to have that belief to be trans, and if that's the belief that you think is false, then you would say that not all people are under a false belief.
No.
You wouldn't say that, or you would say that?
I would not say that everyone under the trans umbrella would be suffering from false beliefs or delusions.
Okay, got you. So right, so trans people aren't necessarily delusional.
Not necessarily, but quite a few of them are.
Okay, sure. Sure. We could talk about, you know, particular instances of trans people and whether we agree that their belief in question is false. But okay, so we got out of the way the first point, which is just rejecting the claim that trans people are delusional. It sounds like we agree now about that. Okay, so what's the next thing you wanted to talk about? Just like so I guess it sounds like what you're wanting to talk about is should we like allow trans women into the category of women, and should we allow trans men into the category of men?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind applicable legislative definitions for these things. Again, because I will exist in the fantasy and the fiction, and I believe that it's appropriate to do so. But when we get down to brass tacks, I really, you know, women is a protected sex class, and because of that, I don't think that males should be let in.
To clarify, when you say like the fantasy or the fiction, right? It sounded like we agreed that there isn't some sort of necessary delusion or fantasy.
No, well, the fantasy is that we're going to, you know, pretend that you're something different. So the fantasy is that we're pretending that you're a trans woman. What you are is a male who expresses himself in stereotypically feminine ways. There's like, so that's the fiction. Using, you know, pronouns that you'd prefer, that is a fiction, especially if I see you as a man. That is fantasy, that's fiction.
Okay, so by fiction, you're not meaning to imply that like
not delusion. It's sort of
okay.
Like a social contract to pleasantries.
I see. Okay, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so got you. So it sounds like what you're saying is that so what's the reason we shouldn't let trans women into the category of women? It's just that women are a protected sex class or something?
Yes.
Okay, so in what sense do you think that accepting trans women into the category of women, in what sense does that sort of like make women more vulnerable or less protected in a way that sort of harms them?
So women have fought for their bodies women have fought for their autonomy. Women have fought for, I mean, in a medical, I mean, so I'm going to give the spiel now, but men have attributed to themselves what it means to be the prototype to be human. And, womanhood is basically synonymous with defection, defective body, inferiority. And because of that, because of what I think is evolution, slash patriarchy, and men being generally the more aggressive and bigger sex, women have fought this sometimes invisible and sometimes very much legislative patriarchy, to be recognized as human. And so for that, we have lobbied for medicine to recognize our bodies as significant beings, not a defective man's. So, stuff like mostly in medicine, women fought to even have public bathrooms at all because we had to. Women had to fight to vote. There are a billion other things. I have a list that, is pretty long, but I don't necessarily want to read the whole thing, but I think I gave the gist. But yeah, and also, there's a very distinct difference between the sexes generally when we talk about generalizations, especially with like evolutionary biology, where that testosterone really is a key player in the differences between humans. We know that in every mammal, it makes male mammals more aggressive, more sexually aggressive, and have higher propensity to violence. Whereas we don't see that across the board with female animals. And we can see that around us in the material, right? Men commit most crimes, they commit most rapes. And because of that, women should have spaces away from the danger. I believe it's a human right for safety and pursuit of happiness, obviously.
Okay, so yeah, so it sounds like you're saying that cis women should have sort of spaces where they're segmented off and basically protected from men because like men are stronger, and
higher
you think
propensity
that
to violence.
Sure. And do you think that like allowing trans women into the category of women sort of generalizes that?
There's a couple things here. So one, it's really hard to make legislative language against a subjective state, right? So when we're saying because now we have, self-ID laws in places like New Jersey, where if you say in a prison, going into a prison, I identify as a female, I identify as a woman, they're just sort of like, okay, and put you in. So what's happening a lot is there are a lot of male inmates who are identifying as women and going into prisons and impregnating female prisoners, abusing these women. And also it's just going to, as this becomes more widespread, we're just going to see news outlets constantly peddle it out. It's just going to become more and more. I don't think that it's like, I try not to fearmonger and talk about how this is going to be like so pervasive, but to me, one is too many. I want to try to prevent any and all. So that's really important to me. And also, so making legislative language around if you pass enough, or if your levels are this, or it doesn't really make sense to do that. The checks and balances don't really check out even across females, like a lot of people bring up. Like there are obviously some females that are much stronger who commit sexual violent crime. But that is a female problem because those people are female. So yeah, half of the fear is that, even after you transition, you still have gone through male puberty. Testosterone has done to your body what it has not done to a female's body, which, you look like a fairly tall, albeit not very muscular young man. But I'm sure that, you could still lift more than the average woman, even so. So even the weakest of men are still very much able to overpower most women.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Felt
if
like
that's
sort
true.
of a backhanded compliment.
Yeah, Ethan.
I don't know.
Ethan, are you still?
I don't think that you're supposed to be. I don't think that you're supposed to be anything but that you are.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if you took that as
No. I was joking.
Yeah.
Are you still a vegan, Ethan? Just out of curiosity.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know about the heavy lifting stuff then.
Maybe not then. Maybe
All
not.
right, go
lift
ahead.
a can of soy or something, but
So yeah,
sure.
the problem is legislative language and also the physical differences between the sexes, and the predators that could, just say that they're women. So it's not even necessarily trans women, but we also see across the board, there have been multiple studies. One, namely, the biggest one is the one that Kathleen Stock took to U.S. Parliament about trans male to female criminality. And we see across the board that there is no difference between criminality across, male archetypes, whether or not you're trans or otherwise. You are still 6 times more likely to commit any crime and 18 times more likely to commit a violent crime than a female.
So I see that sort of the broad appeal is that we want spaces where, only women exist so that they can be protected. I guess there's like a few different like aspects in which I could push back on that. So like one is just that it's like it's at least conceivable or possible that we could have a society wherein trans women are broadly classified as women, but they're just a kind of women who aren't allowed in the same spaces as cis women or something like that.
Yeah,
so that's that's not what I would advocate for.
Yeah, I don't think that any trans rights advocate would, because then there becomes a social hierarchy of women where one is not seen as sufficiently women.
Well, not seen as, it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're not seen as sufficiently women, but rather like we have certain cases where, so for example, like if you watch like, women's boxing or something, like all women can compete, but there are certain women, like women have to compete in different like segmented off spaces within that broad classification, like in different weight classes. Some women, like women who take testosterone or steroids, are just not allowed to compete at all. And if they get tested, and if they found out, they get kicked out. So I think like there are parts of society where different groups of women can be segmented off according to certain considerations. Like we don't want stronger women fighting weaker women in boxing or something. And I think you could see like the trans thing, if you were tempted to go this route, as a sort of similar case of that, where it's like trans women are women, cis women are women, but for certain reasons, like the fact that they've gone through male puberty and so on, trans women shouldn't be let in sort of these certain private spaces with cis women, like prisons or whatever.
So I ask, why would we then call them women?
Because even if they can't have all of the same rights and privileges that cis women have, it's still the case that they're better off, their well-being is higher if we call them women most of the time, and use terms like woman and she, her, and so on to refer to them in ordinary contexts.
So I do reject this premise. I think that I reject the premise of gender affirming care. I think that if we want the best outlook for life for anyone with gender dysphoria or sex dysphoria, to make them feel, as comfortable as they can with their, sex observed at birth. If we're to believe that a life of transgenderism is a life of marginalization, debilitating mental illness, risk for being murdered and suicide, I don't understand why then we would affirm or value a transgender identity over a cisgender identity. We know that cisgender people are much more happy, and I don't know why we don't employ radical self-acceptance tactics or psychotherapy to help these people. I don't think that telling them they can be something that they will never be makes any sense. I think that is actually harmful to them, especially because they're trying to reach this unattainable goal of being something that they can never be.
Sure. So the point you seem to make was just that, obviously being trans is not fun. Trans people have high suicide rates and, high rates of mental illness and stuff like that. And so if being trans is so much worse than being cis, why not just try to make people cis rather than trans, rather than like
not
affirming
make
their
them
trans
cis.
identity.
I don't want to make people cis, but I would like to, employ radical acceptance with anyone's body in the same way we do with patients with anorexia or it's the same way that we would do with patients with anorexia. Like, just tell them that you are your body. You don't need to be anything else. You are exactly who and what you are supposed to be in this time frame. And I think that that would be healthier for everyone.
So one thing is just that, I take it that what we do with anorexic people is we basically try to make them not anorexic, so like, and I think that's fine because like all of the literature, the medical and psychological literature and so on suggests like that's the best thing to do. Being anorexic is very physically unhealthy. It's unsustainable. People with anorexia usually are delusional. So it seems like the best thing we can do for people who have anorexia for their well-being is to convince them not to be anorexic. So then the question is, does the same thing apply to being trans? Is it the case that basically we should just try and convince people to no longer be trans? I think you rejected the characterization, but I feel like if to be trans just is to identify with the other gender, and you're saying we should have people accept themselves as they are so that they don't have to identify with the other gender. Yeah, sure. Then I think that is sort of tantamount to saying that they should stop being trans. That's not necessarily like, I know that sounds bad, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing if that's what was empirically best for them. But I don't think that it is. So like there is this point about,
we know
like,
that it's for children. At the very least, we know that it is the best thing to do for children. Most children end up dissenting. I'm sure that you've seen those, those studies. It's a little harder to do as an adult. And also the elephant in the room is always autogynephilia and, homosexual transsexualism. So I think that, this is another one of my problems with recognizing trans women as women, when we know that a great portion of them are doing so allegedly because of a paraphilia. I have a really hard time with legitimizing that, even if it makes them, even if that is the most real thing to them, because I've read a lot about autogynephilia. I know that it's not creepy, it's not like some weird disease. I know that you would love the woman that you see in the mirror as you would love a partner. Like, I know that it's not, this horrible, awful, evil thing. But I fail to understand why we should recognize a paraphilia as, again, why that should surmount a law protecting a sex class.
Sure. So it seems like you've made, like, there were a few points that you've made about whether we should, whether it's good for trans people to do this. I mean, one of them was just like this thing about cis men or cis people have it better than trans people. So basically the point here is that it is true that people who are born cis have it better than people who are born trans. But
so you believe that you're born trans?
I believe that it's not like a choice to become trans. I believe, like, in the same way that you can be born to be gay.
Gender identity is innate and immovable.
I think that the evidence suggests that attempts to sort of remove one's sort of deviant gender identity don't go very well.
Well, you don't remove, but anyways, you don't remove the expression. I just
wanted to make a few other comments about some things that you said,
sure.
Because I'm getting a bit behind. But anyways, so like, one is that one point that I wanted to make is just that it's true that people who sort of are born trans have it worse than people who are born cis, right? But the relevant question here is whether, not whether people who are born trans have it worse than people who are born cis, but rather whether people who are born trans have it better if we try to make them cis, relative to if we had affirmed their transgender gender identity. Because obviously we can't just go back and make it such that the person was never trans to begin with. We can only try and take a person who's currently trans and make them not trans. And the fact that people who were cis to begin with doesn't mean that somebody who's already trans would be better off if we tried to make them cis after they're now already trans. And then there's this additional point, which was that, most children desist, so we shouldn't be like, affirming this stuff. And so I agree with you that most trans children desist, but depending on what you mean by most trans children, because it's relevant to sort of separate out different groups of people who have sort of deviant gender identities, or however you want to put it, which is just to say that basically kids who are sort of broadly gender expansive, as a matter of fact, end up who, you know, think they want to be the other gender, so on, end up desisting most of the time. But the point is, kids who have like gender dysphoria and who have more serious sort of commitment to transitioning and so on tend actually not to desist. And we can look at certain markers that demarcate trans children who are likely to desist versus trans children who aren't. So for example, there's like this wish-are distinction, like kids who say they wish they were the other gender are more likely to desist, whereas kids who say they are the other gender are less likely to desist. Kids who have more friends of the opposite sex tend to be less likely to desist. So there are certain markers we can look at that competent clinicians can look at to determine which kids are likely to desist and which kids aren't.
So I just wonder why we would help like female children become boys. Like, how is that somehow a better clinical goal than helping her feel comfortable being a girl?
So we can, if you want to, get into the empirical question. I've written about like the empirics of this before, so I guess we can go into that if you want, or we don't have to. But I mean, basically, it just seems like on weight, the best available evidence suggests that attempts to basically make trans people happy with the gender they had first through therapy tend to be associated with a marked increased risk of suicide compared to those who did not get such therapies.
Before we get into any of that, I feel like we kind of bypassed the meat of this conversation where we were at. And I'm not actually clear as to what the answer was. The question which came up, and forgive me for paraphrasing, but I do think that this was kind of the heart of the conversation. Lav, do you think that men can be women or women can be men?
No.
Okay. And Mouthy Infidel, do you think that men can be women and women can be men?
It depends on how we're using the term. So you used the terms man and woman. You use both of those terms twice in the sentence. It depends on what we mean at each point in the sentence, right? If you're saying, can someone who's biologically male be biologically female? No, obviously not. That's like a straightforward contradiction. If you're saying, can someone who's biologically male be a woman in the sense of like having these desire-like traits to express themselves in certain ways and be identified in certain ways, etc., surely that's possible, yes.
Okay. And Lav, just to make sure, did you agree with that?
So it's based on what he's saying is that if you perform a set, so this is what I need for gender identity to ring true, or for anything any proponent of gender identity says about gender identity. Two things need to be true. One, gender identity needs to be universal. Everyone needs to have a gender identity. And two, gender identity needs to be more than a preference or affinity to attributes and roles associated to a sex, for me. So when we talk about ought tos, like ought to, like a man ought to be able to identify as a woman, I would say absolutely no, because I reject the premise that gender is something that we should give merit to. And you are trying to, your whole argument is that you are giving gender merit to affect the material world.
That's true. But I make like a sort of separation between the ought statements that I make in this conversation and then, you know, just like more on controversial statements about like, you know, the truth values of various sentences. And what I said just now was I think something pretty weak and pretty agreeable, which is just that basically like the truth value of a sentence is going to be influenced by what the meaning was for the various words in the sentence. And so if we like, depending on what we mean by woman, the sentence can be true or false at various parts of the sentence.
So, but do you think woman ought to mean a set of stereotypes attributed to the female sex?
No, I don't think that. I think it ought to mean something that's inclusive of trans people.
So, okay, but that would be inclusive. So a set of stereotypes.
It would, but it's not inclusive. The only. So like, it's true that that's one of the definitions of woman that would be inclusive, but
So
it's
what
not
would
the only definition.
what is your perfect definition of woman then?
Okay, so I'm a bit non-committal between a few different like sort of construals in the same vicinity. One thing you could do is just tie it to a certain set of desire-like states, like, and you could have like a weighted criteria. So something, if you like desire to be treated similar to the way that the female sex is treated in a given society, indexed to a given time, etc. If you desire to,
which is a set of stereotypes.
Sure, but it's, I guess the definition, that definition would reference
Because
stereotypes in like a more
women
indirect
seen
way.
in society? I mean, they're sublimated, they're subjugated, and like they're submissive, they're ditzy, they're like, how do you believe that women are seen? The only so sex dimorphism is the only thing that matters. There are two sexes, and we have a reproductive strategy, which is why we name things man or woman. It's just for distinction between the two, not like what makes people happy. Like the same way that we do for race. Like there are black people, there are white people, there are brown people. So I'm interested with your logic, how would you define blackness? Like, can someone identify into being black?
So I don't have a super thought out take on the transracialism question, but I don't think that my sort of whatever definition I give for gender, I have to necessarily therefore give an analogous definition for race, because there might be normative.
Well, I think you have to, because there are laws. There might be like protecting
normative
sex classes. We're protecting race classes. Like,
well, the point is just there might be relevant, like there might be relevant symmetry breakers between race and gender, where like we have certain reasons to redefine the term woman in a way that's more social rather than biological. Meanwhile, we might not have
because it makes people feel good.
Sure, and so there might not be an analog for something like gender dysphoria in the case of race or something like that.
So there's also a disorder in which you believe that your body should have less limbs. If someone actively cuts off their limb and makes themselves disabled and then asks for disability, do we give them the disability checks every month?
I mean, if they're unable to work, we should probably give them disability, sure. It sounds like we have like a really mentally ill person who harmed themselves in their mental illness and is now potentially not functional. If they can't function at work, then yeah, of course.
Sure, but is that seen as the same way? Like you are permanently disabling yourself in a way that is, we talk about race too. If someone acts like a black caricature, if Andrew was sitting here eating watermelon, drinking Kool-Aid and fried chicken and saying the N-word and rapping, would we be like, he is sufficiently black, he gets affirmative action?
So the reason I said that one person should get Social Security or whatever was just because they literally are now physically disabled.
Sure, bad example. You can't physically make yourself a female, so bad example.
Sure. So in terms of the race case, I don't think you necessarily should be able to be like identified.
But what if it makes him so sad to be reminded he's white? What if it makes him so sad? What if he'll kill himself? What if he threatens to kill himself? So if we have like one individual who gets really sad if you don't call him black, that might be a reason to call that one individual black. That's not necessarily. If there are a ton, then sure, I would be more serious about transracialism. How much of the population would be appropriate?
I don't know. Wait.
You're still
sorry. Okay, good.
Yeah, how much of the population? How much of the population do we need to make feel good in order to change laws that protect most people? So that's why we have sex classes, right? That's why we legislate protecting sex classes, because it's the best for the most people. So now there is this very loud, very minute minority that is trying to override a majority generalization legislative branches.
So, and
I'm just like how many people?
So there's two things. One is that I disagree with sort of the implied claim that by sort of including these new people into this category of woman, that we're necessarily sort of like harming the people who are currently lumped under that category, i.e., cis women.
Well,
so I would reject that, and we can talk more about that. But anyways, like my response to this particular question is just, I don't know what like the exact person, like, so if you're just asking what amount of like people would have to be severely negatively impacted by sort of race dysphoria for me to want to for me to take like transracialism more seriously, I don't know like what the exact percentage would be, but I also like I don't think that I need to give an exact percentage to know like that certain percentages would clearly be over that threshold and certain would clearly be under it. So like, for example, like if I shaved off all of my head, right? Or if I shaved off all of my hair, right? And I took a picture of my head every day as it sort of grew back, right? First picture, okay, I'm bald. Second picture, okay, I'm still bald. Third picture, still bald. At some point, I'm no longer bald. I think you would have a really hard time finding like the exact specific picture at which point I become no longer bald. So the point is just that we have certain thresholds that are like vague. We can't pinpoint exactly where they are, but you should have no trouble. Like right now, I'm not bald.
Sure,
And
but
certain, and if after the day after I shaved my head, I would be. So you can still have sort of clear classifications on either side of the threshold.
sure, but do you believe in democracy?
Mhm.
So we have democracy, and so that, you know, the most people agreeing on something can make something into fruition, right? Like that's why we vote.
Mhm.
It, you know, it's good for the most amount of people. It's a representative. It's a representative of the general
Mhm.
population. And so I just, if we're talking about like the feelings of people who, based off of an arbitrary set of stereotypical characteristics in which we assign to the sexes, are now supposed to be seen, if you perform them, to be sufficiently that of another class, it better be, you better have a good fucking argument for it. Otherwise, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I think
and I
the
believe a lot of people will be like, well, discrimination is bad. I full-heartedly believe in discrimination. I think that we discriminate every day. Like, I don't think that anyone would want a pedophile working in an elementary school. Like, I don't think, you know what I mean? So I think it's very important to keep predators, and we know that, you know, on top of the food chain, males are apex predators. We know that oftentimes their prey is their female counterpart. So whether or not you identify as something does not make you less of a threat.
So I would agree that, like, so I mean, there is this question of, and so I guess like, I'm not sure in some sense what the sort of original point was, but I guess we can sort of, some of these later remarks you've made, I guess we can talk about those. Like, so you seem to be claiming that, you know, like I said earlier, one of these problems with allowing, so one thing that you said is just that you have to have a good argument in order to like revise the category. I think that I agree with that broadly. I think that there's like a lot of sort of tacit information and you know, useful stuff built into our current norms, so we generally should have a good reason before revising things. I think that's a fine argument. Like, I'm sort of a, you know, in some sense a conservative in that regard, but like I would say that you know, a case is just that revising, you know, these categories of gender exclude people from the genders they want to be identified as in certain ways that do a lot of material harm to like a decent number of people. And I don't think that there's any sort of significant overriding harm that would be incurred by revising those categories, as you seem to think. One of the reasons you seem to think that there is some overriding harm is just this thing about strong men going into
Not necessarily strong men, it's just sex dimorphism. Like, it's just important to note that there are real tangible differences between the sexes across the board.
Sure. Yeah, so like there's a couple points I would make here. One is, like, I made this point earlier, which is just that you can broadly call trans women women, but say they're women that shouldn't be allowed into certain spaces with other women.
But then why would we call them women?
Again, because they get their well-being is increased when we call them women in most ordinary contexts, even if we don't grant them all of the same rights and privileges that other trans women do.
So it's a fiction. So you would engage in the fantasy and the fiction to make people feel good. But then why are you placating this group of people?
Not any more than you're engaging in a fiction when you say that, look, you're a woman, but you took steroids, so you can't box with the other women.
Well, that's not a fantasy. You are now at an
advantage.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think either are like, so if by fiction you mean something that just isn't true, right? Something that's not right.
Yeah.
Like,
So you cannot. So being like even like, you know, it's not just trans people are not just happy with saying like, oh, I like being in this role. They want to change their driver's license to male or female accordingly. And that is, you know, that fucks up the census. That fucks up crime statistics. I mean, that fucks up a lot of things for us. Like that is, I mean, besides even prisons, like when you count domestic violence deaths or you know, crime patterns, they're impossible to track when we're not using any material reality in basis. When you can identify out of anything, and if we're identifying out of our physiology, how soon until we identify out of our race? And then what does that look like for a census? How do then governments track, you know, our behavior to keep us safe and to, you know, give us information? Like it just doesn't make any sense. And so when you want to call these people trans women, I will call them trans women also, but I do not pretend that they are under the subset of woman. They are under the subset of man, and we're being nice to them and we're placating them because they're mentally ill or because they want to give merit to a system that oppresses women. And I don't think that there should be given any merit to that.
So so what's wrong with the position that trans women are women, but they shouldn't have all the same rights and privileges as other women, and maybe they also shouldn't have their driver's license, you know, or their social security or whatever changed to say female or male? Say we could say you're not a female or male, you're just a woman, or sorry, you're not a female, you're just a woman. You don't have the same rights as every other woman, but we're still going to broadly, you know, let you live out the roles as a woman, and we're going to call you a woman, and we're going to call you by she, her pronouns, etc.
Expression is protected under law. You can wear whatever you want. It is protected under law.
Yeah.
The subjective state of gender identity should not be. It doesn't. No other human subjective state is protected under law. And again, it's based off of gender identity. Oftentimes, is based off of a set of random or arbitrary stereotypical laws in which we attribute traits to the sexes, which is oppressive to both men and women. Wouldn't it be more subversive or better to society to just be like, I'm a man and I'm going to wear whatever the fuck I want. I'm going to look however I want. I'm going to get fake boobs. I'm going to do whatever. And then you have your own protections based on that. I obviously know the statistics that trans women are at a disadvantage in male prisons. I don't want them in general population with male prisoners, right? I would like for them to have either their own prisons or a different sect, just as I would, you know, prefer gender nonconforming people to potentially have their own bathrooms, or to just have a single stall bathroom for everyone. But yeah, it doesn't, when you say, why can't we, you know, just placate, why can't we just placate that this makes them feel good? And I'm like, okay, well, what makes them feel good oppresses women. And
Okay,
this tiny group of people are trying to, what makes them feel good are the shackles on females.
So
if you can opt into womanhood by performing our shackles, by putting on our shackles, I just don't agree that we should give that any merit.
Okay, so there are 2 points I want to make, and the second one is important because I don't want to be too sort of sidelined into defending the view that I've so far talked about, or I would defend the conditional view, but you know, whatever. The point just is that I think that, so you can say, like, I thought that what we were arguing about initially was just, should, broadly speaking, in society, in most ordinary contexts, socially, culturally, etc., should trans women be sort of called women, referred to as women, categorized as women in most ordinary contexts, etc. And the point that I've been making so far is that, because you said that, you know, acknowledging them as such in that way sort of oppresses women. But the point that I've been making so far is, it seems like the things that you're worried about, you know, the things about trans women in women's prisons and so on, that's consistent with accepting that we should.
Women. What makes
hold on.
a man a woman?
Okay, you're not going to derail me. I was making you're
going on a tangent.
No, I'm going on a tangent.
And you're pretending that we're not.
Hang on. Femoid. He gave you a long slice to talk. Let him finish his points. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, so like my first point is just that what I thought like taking the affirmative position that I've taken on the question of should we broadly speaking refer to trans women as women and call trans women as women in social and cultural contexts, etc. And the view that I've taken is yes, we should. That's consistent with still, you know, segmenting trans people off in all of the ways that you seem to be concerned about. And I think that like reasonable people who are broadly supportive of trans rights and who broadly think that trans women are women can disagree about certain issues. Like I've heard a lot of trans activists say that sure, like the trans sports thing or the trans prison thing, these are contentious issues that reasonable people can disagree about. But that doesn't mean you have to say that trans women aren't women and that trans men aren't men. But like, yeah, so that's just like the most important point. But like the other point is, I actually don't agree with sort of some of the things that you're saying. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that allowing trans women into certain women's spaces like bathrooms and stuff actually has led to any sort of market increase in like sexual assaults or anything like that.
It's less so, definitely, but prisons definitely are it is a it's becoming a problem, especially in places like Scotland.
Yeah, I guess what's sure. I guess what's weird to me is that like if you're just concerned about certain things like prisons and sports, like there's not like a consensus among like pro-trans people that, you know, we should be letting trans women into cis women's sports or prisons. So I just don't see why you have this connection of like,
well, I don't think that there has to be a consensus. I'm not fighting every trans person. I'm fighting this ideology, but that says that trans women are women. Like I'm not fighting every trans person. Again, I have no problem with like any individual trans person. If you feel comfortable expressing the way that you want to express, do your thing. I'm friends with many a trans women who do that. Like I don't care about expression at all. In fact, I think that we should move towards a more androgynous looking and acting society. I think that would be better. And I really have no problem, especially with trans women being on estrogen. I think that decreasing testosterone levels in men is actually a net good on society. So I really don't have any problem. I think you forced estrogenizing for all men. I know Andrew likes that. But I do want to ask you two questions while you were talking. Mm-hmm. I want you to answer, what are these trans rights you're talking about, and what rights don't trans people have, and what would make a man a woman?
Okay, so with regards to the first question, I would just say that, you know, sort of important trans rights are like one, the right to be broadly in most social and cultural contexts referred to in the way you want to be referred to, you know, have the pronouns that you want to be used, be called the, you know, woman or man if you want to be called woman or man, etc. Okay. Also like to have, you know, access to transitioning, which again, I see is a broader
you
part
want
of
to
like
protect, how is it a human right to protect a subjective state? I want you to refer to me as beautiful and the smartest person you've ever known. It makes me feel really good. And if you don't do that, you're a bigot.
Okay.
How do we protect a subjective state?
Unlike the trans case, okay, we don't want to actually indulge in delusions. I'm just joking. But anyways, the point is,
mm-hmm. what if I felt more comfortable? Like, I want you to refer to me as black, like, or I feel black. I mm-hmm. feel skinny. Refer to me as skinny. Like we don't protect it. It's not a human right to enforce our identities on other people. It's a courtesy.
Sure. So
it's a courtesy to call someone the right pronouns, but it should not be a right. It should not infringe on anyone else's rights.
So I would just say that like there are some requests that are like legitimate and that like I think people have an obligation to sort of like acknowledge and act in accordance with. There are some requests that are less legitimate and that people aren't sort of obligated to acknowledge and go along with. And I think like whether the request is one which other people are obligated to go along with is kind of just determined by how much that request, like A, how much effort it takes the other person to fulfill the request, and B, how much that request being fulfilled or not fulfilled impacts like your well-being. And I think like the important point in the trans case is that we actually just have a lot of evidence that being referred to as trans and transitioning to the other, or being referred to as a woman and transitioning to the other gender and so on,
but then we
is
lose
really
our First
substantively good. No, I'm not.
But then we lose our First Amendment right, which makes us the most beautiful nation in the world.
I'm not proposing any laws that would violate the First Amendment. I'm not saying that you should go to jail.
You're saying it should be taboo.
Yeah, I'm saying that you're morally, you should be considered like sort of morally obligated in the same way that sort of like for the purposes of analogy, right? Like it's not like, so if I have a friend who's an adoptive parent, right? I could go along saying you're not a real parent because you're not a biological parent. You're only a parent in this fake social sense. You're not a real parent,
Sure,
etc. I
you
could say
wouldn't do
that.
that out of nowhere. You
I
wouldn't
don't
do that
think
out of
that.
nowhere, but it
Sure.
doesn't hold any moral weight over if this person's like, you're a piece of shit, you're ugly. Well,
Mhm.
you can say, well, you're not my real mom.
Sure,
Like that's not
sure.
it,
But
like
I
I
think
don't
if
I don't ever think that anyone should go up to a random trans person and berate them randomly.
Sure.
But if you come at me and you call me a name, like I'm sorry, but you're right. Like your identity that I'm being courteous to is like bets are all fucking off. Like I'm gonna call you a man.
Sure, that's yeah, I mean you can do that. I guess like what I'm saying is just like if I were to just out of nowhere say like, you know, you're not a real parent, etc., I would be an asshole. I don't think I should go to jail for saying that, but I think I did something immoral by not saying that.
Sure.
And I think that other people should consider me like an asshole for saying that.
Sure, it's bad to hurt people's feelings.
Yeah, like
but
yeah,
also
sure.
but also we acknowledge that like it is also like a true thing that they are not really a female or a male. So, you know,
mm-hmm. But the important point is like,
I don't know how taboo it should be seen to, you know, call out a physical reality.
So, but you're not necessarily calling out a physical reality. So like, okay, so to go back to like the parent analogy, if we have somebody who considers themselves a parent because they're an adoptive parent, right? And they use the term parent in a way that's broadly inclusive of adoptive and biological parents. But then if I am like, no, I use the term parent in a way that strictly refers to the biological sense of the term parent and excludes the social sense. So on my definition, adoptive parents aren't real parents, right? If they say, no, call me a parent, they're not asking me to say something false. They're not asking me to say that they're a biological parent. They're just saying, hey, could you like expand your definition of woman a little bit so that you can truly call me a parent? Because, you know, if your definition of parent was inclusive of this social construct, it wouldn't be false to call them a parent.
So, but there's more of a trade-off when you call a man a woman than there is a trade-off to call a parent a non-parent or a parent. Like, what you're doing when you call an adoptive parent a parent is not negatively harming anyone. In fact, you are a parent. You are being called a parent so that you have the same legal obligations to the child. Whereas, like, we should not make it so that men have, like, men and women are different, right? So there's a trade-off with calling a man a woman, and it's that now women are not identified as a protected sex class on their own anymore. Like there's too big of a trade-off there, I would argue.
Sure. So I think that I guess what I've been trying to argue previously is just that here's a situation you could have. There are, you know, trans women are women, cis women are women, they're all women, but there's also a meaningful distinction between trans women and cis women. And maybe trans women, this is a subject for debate, maybe they shouldn't have all of the same privileges that
but then they aren't women.
I don't agree in the same sense that like
then my second question, what makes a man a woman?
A cis woman who went to prison, for example, doesn't have all the same rights and privileges as your ordinary woman, but they're still a woman. And so in terms of like what makes someone a woman, so I guess this is just sort of, you know, going back to the question of like how do I construe womanhood. And so I think like
no, I'm not what is a woman. I'm asking what would make a man a woman.
Sure, I would just say having the right desires, having the right psychological states.
Okay, well then what makes someone black?
I think I haven't like thought a lot about the transracial issue. So maybe I'm pro transracial, maybe I'm not. I haven't like thought about it very much. Yeah, I might end up being, you know, that's fine. So I'm kind of agnostic. Maybe I'll take a biological sort of definition of race, or maybe I'll take like a more social one that's in line with how I construe of gender. What I would need to see to determine that is, do the same considerations which lead me to think that we ought revise our category of woman also apply in the case of race, such that I think we ought revise our concepts of race. I like whether or not those same considerations apply hasn't been sort of proven or disproven to me decisively. So I'm just not sure, I guess.
Well, I think if you were to answered honestly, or other proponents of gender ideology, when asked what makes a man a woman, it is basically a set of stereotypes, and it always is. And you can ask a billion people this, and most of them will say, well, if they want to be one, which, like, okay, we don't take into account what someone wants to be when we look at physical reality. Like, we don't for any other situation, like literally for any other situation. Like, human identity is not protected in any other situation. And then a set of arbitrary traits, like, if they just perform enough, if they look enough like a woman, and it's like, okay, well, there's certainly females who don't look like women and should still be protected under that. So
Sure.
I don't know. It's a couple things.
So, I mean, I don't know why you sort of like randomly accuse me of like taking a definition that I don't actually like use as my actual definition. I mean, you can look through like my sort of like things I've said about gender in the past. I've always sort of used the same genre of construal. But anyways,
because
like,
you guys are
I earlier
sneaky.
mentioned
You guys are very
earlier,
sneaky, and
okay.
you use very flowery language
I also,
to make this.
It's worth another thing. Like, I earlier mentioned a definition that you did charge with the sort of social role thing. You did include it you accused it of including sort of what's it called, like stereotypes, as you call it. I would say that like the definition that I gave at that time was just like, you have certain desires, and this is a definition that I think a trans activist could give. It's like, you have certain desires. The desires are basically towards you have certain desires to be treated and classified in certain ways, in ways similar to the way that like the female sex is treated and classified, indexed to a given society at a given time or something like that. And so the point is, sure, that definition sort of indirectly references what you would call stereotypes, but it's consistent with that definition that we might want to do away with those stereotypes over time, because remember, my definition said that it indexes this to a given time. So we might say that we have that definition, but that over time we want to change these social roles and so on, such that there aren't any social roles associated with womanhood. So like everything I've said is fully
I think that
compatible with like gender abolitionism. Now you could argue that like nonetheless, even though my definition is compatible with like being a gender abolitionist and pursuing those goals, maybe it makes it harder to abolish gender. But then I would need to just like hear the argument for that. Like, what's sort of the mechanism by which adopting that definition would make it more difficult to abolish gender. In fact, I might argue it might make it even easier, because what I'm proposing is a revision of gender roles, and that might make further revisions in the direction of gender abolition more like politically palatable, more within the scope of the Overton window or whatever.
Well, I think that would seep into sex more than the other route would. Like, if you can change sex, if you get rid of sex language, it would more decimate sex roles and keep protections, ambiguous for the sex classes. But when you read like feminist theory, or Andrea Dworkin and her gender abolition movement was basically like, I want to be supportive of trans people, but I want to move towards a world in which nobody would be trans because we don't give any of these gender roles merit. That's sort of the world in which I want to live in. Like, nobody would have to be trans in my utopia, because we have not given merit to the fact that you can change your social caste based off of performing, and you see trans women especially performing these very, very bastardized male fantasy versions of womanhood, because they're looking at womanhood through the scope of maleness, through the scope of how they've been socialized, especially with their testosterone and sexual aggression. And then you get people like Nikita Dragon or Gigi Gorgeous. Women don't look like that. Those are not women. Those are humanized blow up dolls. Like, there's no. And what does that mean for society when that's a woman, when that's seen as sufficiently woman? And when even trans people are holding themselves to this standard, like, if I'm just feminine enough, and then using this arbitrary set of rules to position themselves within womanhood, it just is so yucky. Like, it just feels dystopian.
So you said like, okay, well, if we accept, like sort of my construal or my definition, you might end up having people who don't look like women and so on, but are still considered women. And what does that mean? Well, it sounds like what that means is that gender categories have been expanded, and now there is less of an extent to which certain social roles and expressions are necessarily tied to certain sexes, which is the thing we both agree we should be doing away with.
But now they're saying that they're not men because of
it. It's strange. Like your complaint is that my definition means that you can be a woman who doesn't look enough like the average woman. I thought we agreed that shouldn't be the case.
That is not the complaint. The problem, like I said, if you were to be a man and you were to right now get breast augmentation, wear your hair long and wear makeup, you would still be a man doing those things. That is subversive. That is getting rid of the gender binary. Giving those things merit and saying that you are no longer a man because of those things is actively contributing to the gender binary. Actively. It is upholding gender.
But how so? Like why? Like
because
why do you
now
think that?
You are saying because since we can't opt out of our sex. You're saying that gender is sufficient, performance is sufficient enough to, sufficient meaning that gender is now given merit to be some other thing, to now exist in this material reality, which you're saying that now you can't be a man and do all these things. Now you must be, or you become a woman based off of performance,
so
which that is not gender abolition.
That's not, so I don't think that if you say that like, oh, if I, like start taking HRT and so on, I can do all that and become a woman. I don't think that necessarily commits you to, and I don't think that the view that most like trans activists or pro-trans people would take would necessarily commit you to the claim that if anybody does those things, they thereby become a woman, and there can't be a man who does those things without being a woman, because I think that self-ID. on most construals there is probably a social component and there's also a psychological component, but the psychological component could be necessary still, so it would avoid the implication that you mentioned.
Yeah, so just as you identify as a woman, because there are plenty of so then it's completely reliant on self-ID. And I just don't like, how do we legislate that? We literally can't. If someone says I want to be a woman and they look like Andrew, or they're saying like, they're getting sent to a prison, or they're trying to get affirmative action, grants for college, and Andrew's like, well, I'm a woman. Legislatively, how do you protect against that with self-ID?
How do you protect against, sorry, what? I was writing some of the points down.
How do you protect against someone like Andrew claiming that, he's a woman to get special privileges?
What do you mean by special privileges?
Like going into a female prison or getting like college grants off the basis of sex.
Well, you could, so I'll answer that question. I also want to make like a couple other remarks about some of the points you made in that last thing. But I mean, a very easy way is you could just say, Andrew's a woman, he's a trans woman, but trans women aren't allowed in the same prisons as cis women or something like that. And now a few of the other things that I wanted to say. But then why call them women? Wait, hold on. When you made this claim that like my thing is relying on self-ID, I don't think that's like necessarily the case, although I grant you that what I'm doing is something a little similar, like in spirit, but like technically self-ID is just identifying as a woman and basically saying that you're a woman is necessary and sufficient for being a woman. I'm not necessarily saying that like the act of identification is necessary. I'm saying that it's just certain psychological inclinations, certain desire-like states are necessary. And those desire-like states may often be certain desires, like the desire to be called a woman, the desire to be referred to using she, her pronouns, etc. But I also wanted to say, like, you made this point about like, how can we legislate this? Well, there are two things I would say about this. Like, one is just that not everything has to be legislated. As it turns out, like cultural and social phenomena and norms have a massive impact on people's quality of life. And so when we're talking about like what's meaningful and like what society ought to do, what directions ought society be moving in, I don't think we have to restrict ourselves to just talking about like policy. I think we can also talk about like what norms should we adopt and so on, because those are also very consequential. But there also are certain like legislative measures that I would push, and that's sort of motivated by my sort of view on trans people, which is like, I think we should give them easier access to basically transitioning and healthcare for transitioning and so on. Things like that.
Yeah, I think that trans people should be able to transition and do whatever they want with their bodies. but I don't want to fucking pay for it. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to pay for a man to get a breast augmentation with my tax dollars. Like, I'm just not going to do it. If there's ever a chance where I can vote against that, I'm going to do it in a fucking heartbeat. Like, I'm sorry that I'm not going to spend my money, my hard-earned money, on a man trying to, you know, especially if there's a basis of autogynephilia. Like, I'm not paying for your breast augmentation. I'm not paying for your nose job. I'm not paying for your facial feminization surgery. Like, you should be able to pay for those things. And I'm sorry if you don't want to. And this is why I think that radical acceptance therapy is more appropriate, because only a very small percentage of trans people can even pay for their surgeries out of pocket. So then why would we then treat even the poor trans people, trying to say that, you know, what will make them happy is going down a route of extremely expensive surgery? It doesn't make a sense, especially in getting other people to pay for it. Andrew's paying for some man to get his boobs put on. Like, how does that seem conducive to a society that is, like, one, you know, prosperous, and two, that have moved past sexually subjugating women? If you can just become a woman, like, I'm so, like, I just think that's ridiculous. Like, a male projection of womanhood having, like, breasts and lip augmentation and all these things. Like, why am I supposed to pay for that?
So, I mean, the basic principle, and I think this is sort of like a broadly, you know, leftist principle, that I take to inform sort of my views about, like, healthcare policy and such, is just that if we have some medical treatment that would be substantially beneficial to the quality of someone's life, that should be, like, basically paid for by society. So I don't just think this.
And I think it would be, I think that, you know, it would be substantially better to, you know, help these people feel more in tune with see, this is what I have a problem with liberalism, is it's so focused on capital and so focused on you know, like, money. Because there's
I'm an anti-capitalist, right?
Then that makes no fucking sense, because the only reason
why
we would value
nationalizing the private healthcare industry while being an anti-capitalist doesn't make sense.
The only reason we would value like, transgender affirmation surgeries is because you're filling the pockets of these doctors who are doing it.
No, absolutely not. The reason I support it is because
I don't understand why the
standard.
standard. We have no idea if that's true. We have no idea if affirmation radical acceptance therapy is better. We have not tried it.
Because I disagree. We've done studies on it. We've done a lot of studies on this. We can exchange.
We haven't, because it's been outlawed because it's been seen as conversion therapy.
I can reference you one right now.
Because it is seen as innate and fixed. We have not tried to do. It's seen as conversion therapy because proponents of gender ideology believe that gender identity is fixed and you are born with it. So it is seen as unjust to try to form it in any way. So we have not any long-term studies, especially in America, describing radical acceptance care. We just don't.
It depends on what you mean by long-term. So I agree that the evidence isn't perfect, but we go off of, like, we make prescriptions based on imperfect evidence all of the time. You know what I mean? So, like, my claim is that even though the evidence isn't absolutely conclusive in this particular case, the evidence is a bit shaky, a bit inconclusive. But, like, I would still say that in light of the best evidence currently available, it seems to me that radical acceptance therapy or conversion therapy, however you want to put it, is actually associated with a marked increased risk of suicide compared to trans people who didn't get such surgeries.
I believe
whereas like transitional therapies are associated with a marked decrease in suicide attempts and suicidal ideations relative to control groups of trans people who wanted to get those kinds of therapies but didn't. So, like, sure, like, the evidence in both cases isn't perfect. I mean, we can exchange empirics. I can, like, sort of name you the studies or send them over private chat right now if you want. I have everything pulled up. But, like, the point is just that, like, sure, the evidence isn't perfect, but the best available evidence, like, on weight, suggests that transitioning works and conversion therapy doesn't, basically.
Yeah, I just don't there are certain real world things, like this idea of fairness also really, really bugs me. Like this idea that your life, that you can change every aspect about your life exactly the way that you wish to, and you can enforce other people to do it with you. It makes no sense when someone has a terminal illness and they are extremely unhappy about it, and they're even suicidal about having stage 4 cancer. You don't say, well, we can pretend you don't have it. Like,
Well, yeah,
life isn't fair. You can be born into a body that you hate. You can be fat. I'm not going to pretend that you're thin. You could be born into a body that you hate.
But the whole problem
And that
here,
is you are your body. You are your body.
but the whole problem,
There is nothing that you can do about it, really, and you should not infringe on my First Amendment right by making me go along with it, or by making me pay for the surgery that makes you feel better. Life isn't fair. I wish I was a millionaire. In fact, the government should give me $1 million because I feel like a millionaire. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make
Sure.
any sense.
So
The government should actually give me an Einstein's brain. I know they keep it somewhere cryogenically. I identify as the smartest person alive, and I should get his brain.
Sure. So, could you restate the first part of that? Because
Listen,
yeah. Okay.
We're an hour and a half in, and we're gonna wrap this debate up here.
Slay.
I've got plenty of callers in the background. Want to talk to both of you. For the purposes of time management, I've got to end it here. I've let this go and I feel like we're covering a lot of the same ground kind of anyway. So if you don't mind, Ethan, I'd like to get into closing statements and then move on to callers, unless you have something that you think is super pertinent.
Yeah, we can get into closing statements. Sure.
All right. Femoid, because Ethan opened first, I'm going to let you close first. Give him the last word. You can take the same 7 minutes. You have it on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, I believe that my body is a material reality, and my reality is also formed by my physical actuality. Jesus Christ. My physical actuality and a life lived through cultural constructions.
What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?
A motorcycle?
Was that a motor? It sounded like a whale dying. What the fuck is that?
Yeah, no, it was not a whale dying. But hold on, closing statements. Yeah. A woman is adult human female. A female is the sex that holds the non-mobile larger sex gamete. Feminists and women have fought for women to remain a protected sex class, a material reality, not an idea or a construct that anyone can take hold of. Woman as a gender role is a role that revolves around masochism, self-hatred, and passivity. I resent I am to be seen as fragile, submissive, pink, ditzy as a woman. I resent that I must be a hole for fucking, a mouth for fucking, and an ass for fucking, a nurse, a saint, a mother, an object. That my hair has to be long, my legs shaved, my eyelashes always at a feminine length, even when I am sick, even when I am dying, even when I am building someone in my body. I will not be pushed into these things to affirm my spot in my own sex class or protected sex class. And when a male does these things, it does not and should not give him access to my bathroom, my sports, my prisons, my crisis centers, my affirmative action opportunities, and my body in a medical setting, and the right to call himself a woman in anything other than fictitious play pretend.
Okay, so
hang on a second.
Yeah.
Can you say that 3 times fast? All right, Ethan, you're up. You have the same 7 minutes on the clock. Take as much of it as you like or as little of it as you like. Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I'll just respond to sort of the last couple things Lav said in our exchange. So I guess, like, one thing you said is, like, if somebody has cancer, we shouldn't just convince them that they don't have cancer. I mean, there's a couple disanalogies there. One is that I don't think that I don't think that there's any sort of good evidence suggesting that telling people that have cancer that they actually don't have cancer is actually like the most successful way of allowing them to have a positive quality of life for their past few years or whatever. But if that were the case, maybe we should. I don't know. I haven't thought much about that. But maybe that would be a good idea if that were the case, which it's not. Whereas on the other hand, I think that for trans people, there is pretty good evidence to suggest that calling them women and so on drastically increases their mental health and is the best way to do so given their situation. But also there's another crucial disanalogy, which is that in the cancer case, you're basically and telling them that they don't have cancer, you're basically instilling in somebody a delusion, a false belief. They literally do have cancer. To tell them that they don't that would be false, right? Whereas we already agreed, we agreed earlier that being trans it doesn't entail that you have any sort of false belief. It doesn't entail that you have a delusion. And so it sort of seems like, when pushed, we agree that trans people aren't delusional, but then like in other contexts, you sort of make it sound like you think that they do, or you sort of make arguments that in order to work, sort of assume that they do have such a delusion. He also said something about like, I don't want my First Amendment right to be infringed on. Again, somebody can run over the VOD if they want. I don't think I have proposed like a single piece of legislation that any lawyer would affirm, violates the First Amendment. So I guess I don't know, in that respect where that came from. I don't think so. You said also something about like, you seemed to imply that making you pay for trans like healthcare and so on would be violating your First Amendment. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that like single payer healthcare is a violation of the First Amendment or anything like that. And I'm not sure how like adding one more treatment to the list of treatments covered by the single payer healthcare plan would like, make it all of a sudden start violating the First Amendment.
Should I pay for any influencer on Instagram to get a pair of boobs?
This is his closing statement. Let him close.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Ethan.
I would say no. I mean, the point is that, it's not like anybody who wants any elective surgery, no matter how like, unimportant or whatever it is, should have, society cover their costs. The point is certain like important and necessary interventions should be paid for by society in contexts where, expert medical professionals have deemed that these surgeries are in fact necessary for the individual that is being sort of prescribed to have that therapy done or something like that. Yeah, you said some stuff about you think it's sort of incompatible with like anti-capitalism because the whole reason I want this is to fill the pockets of capitalists who are doing these therapies and so on. I mean that's just not true. One is that what I've advocated for is actually nationalizing healthcare companies, so it wouldn't be capitalists who are making money from performing these surgeries and so on. It would be a nationalized program, so that's not capitalist at all. But also like, even if I were to not advocate for nationalizing the healthcare industry and so on, it still wouldn't be a pro-capitalist argument any more so than
government buildings that
let him
people
close.
I'm sorry.
Let him make his closing. He didn't interrupt yours. Go ahead, Ethan, finish your closing.
Sure. So so like basically one is I'm saying that it shouldn't even be capitalists doing this, so I don't think that that's pro-capitalist. But also, like, even if I did think capitalists should be the ones performing these surgeries and so on, that saying that that should be covered and so on isn't any more like pro-capitalist than saying that like people should have like vaccines that gets subsidized or something like that. The point is that the motivation for advocating for the government basically providing these services or paying for these services is that these services increase the mental well-being of the people who are the recipients of them. I could care less how much money a capitalist makes from performing these surgeries. What I care about is the trans person who had the surgery performed on them, who's now going to lead a better life because of it. I don't think there's anything that I remembered you saying that I have to respond to. I think I covered my responses to everything that you said that I could remember wanting to respond to.
All right, thank you for that. Before we move into the callers, we do things a little bit differently here at the Crucible. Once the closing statements are done, we do consider that section of the debate over. The moderator can then participate. I usually write down some questions as I go. And I have a few that I'm going to ask before I let the callers on. I haven't picked on Femoid in a while. So I got a few for her first. So Femoid, estrogen has been dropping in men for years, on average, for years. And I know that you had
testosterone, estrogen.
I'm sorry. Yeah, testosterone has been dropping.
That's how we met. We did a debate on Modern Day Debate where you were like, "Is this bad?"
Yeah. So but suddenly we also have a bunch of trans women running around, and you don't seem very happy with them, considering the only delineation with them on average that they can really point to is their estrogen level. Just kind of curious why you would make a prescription that all men should go on estrogen.
Well, I don't think that being on estrogen would make a man a woman and therefore be a protected sex class. But I think that testosterone is something that seems to be detrimental
Yeah, but without
to the
it,
safety of others.
right? But I feel like you didn't really address what I'm saying. There's definitely, you don't think there's any correlate there between testosterone dropping and this kind of huge spike in the trans phenomenon?
No, I think that there could be, because I think that, in a life lived through social constructions, if you're not performing masculinity, especially because, there aren't as many men working out in the field, there are a lot of jobs that have been automated where robots are doing what men, had been doing for a very long time. I feel like men are probably displaced. And then, especially in an economy and like this one where you might be disenfranchised or lonely, it might seem easier to fill the role of woman because woman is seen as the inferior status of man. So it seems like that's an easy place to go. I understand that.
Gotcha. Second question I have for you. Before feminists try to run out the patriarchy due to our mass abuses of women, I was going to suggest that you start with teaching women where the fuck they want to go to eat dinner. Because nothing on earth makes me want to abuse a woman more than I don't know, followed by every suggestion being rejected. So to quote the great feminist writer S.E. Hinton, things are rough all over.
Listen, okay. Well, okay, women can't choose where to eat, and you guys can't stop raping people. So I think that there's
is there a correlate there? That's the,
don't you dare.
That's the question.
Oh my God.
Is there a correlate there?
Oh
Okay.
my God, don't you dare.
Okay, so last one. This is a serious question, this next one.
Okay.
Is Christianity a self-identity? And it's a protected class right now, should it be?
So it's not a protective class in which the layman, I have to recognize your Christianity in the way that I treat you. You are free to do whatever. You are free to.
You can't discriminate against me based on my Christianity.
Sure, but it's the way that you express your Christianity, not your intrinsic state. So you're not making me call. I don't have to call you like a Christian or whatever. I can call you whatever I want, and then also you're protected in the expression of your religion. So
yeah, but you can do that now with trans people, right?
How so?
Well,
we do protect.
You just can't do it. You just can't do it in the workplace and things like that. Same way you can't do it with Christians, but you can. So they have essentially the same protection that Christians do. Christians have the same protection that they do. But if you're out in public, you can call a trans person whatever you want.
Well, yes, but they're saying, I mean, trans advocates are saying that that's not necessarily good. And some are even trying to legislate that misgendering is as a hate crime. So,
right. But I'm just saying, I guess what I'm trying to compare here is, would you say Christianity is a self-identity?
No, I'd say that that's like a social construction in the same way that I believe that expression of whatever you want, like if you're a man who wants to look like a female, you should be protected under law to express that. I believe that you should be protected under law to express your Christianity if it's not harming anyone, right? Unless you're, if you want to like burn crucifixes and put them on like black people's lawns, obviously, then I don't want you to be able to do what you do if you're harming someone. But yeah, that's less so a subjective state and more like an opted-in identity. And we recognize that as an opted-in identity. You're not born Christian, right? You're not born. That's what Ethan tried to say earlier.
Right?
Yeah, but what Ethan tried to say earlier is that we are born with gender identity. So it's like it's this intrinsic, deeply held, like sort of.
That's not necessarily my position. I don't think that your gender identity is necessarily the only claim I think I committed myself to is not that your gender is necessarily determined by birth. Like, so somebody who's born, it's just like sort of innate in them that they're going to be trans, and no contingent circumstances can change that inevitability from happening. All I really committed myself to is just that being trans isn't like a conscious decision. It's basically determined by factors that are outside of like the individual's ability to just sort of like control on a whim or something like that.
Last question I have is for you, Ethan. I feel like you kind of copped out there in the transracial argument, and I actually have some trouble believing you haven't engaged with it or thought about it because I know you. So I'm sure you've thought about it at some point. But I don't feel like you reconciled it at all. Lav had a really solid point there, where she was expressing basically, why can't you be black? Why can't you, Ethan?
Sure. So I don't think that there was any point that I didn't address. So I mean, my stance on transracialism is genuinely just sort of non-committal. Like I mean, I've thought about it for sure, but I haven't sort of thought about it enough to like have a strong, confident view that I'm willing to say sort of publicly. But I would say, like, I don't think there's any objection that I didn't respond to, because basically, okay, here's my response. Like, if you're saying, you know, can you just be Black? Well, okay, conditional on it being the case that there is a sufficiently large number of people who are badly distressed by, you know, their transracialism. Conditional on that being the case, as it is the case for trans people, then yes, I think that we should recognize people as their preferred racial identity, just the same way I think people should be referred to as their preferred gender identity. If that's not the case, then maybe we shouldn't. So the point is, there's just like this conditional assumption. We're like, conditional on this assumption being true, yes, we should. That condition holds definitely for trans people. I'm not sure if it holds for transracial people. But if it does, then yeah, I would say treat them the same as trans people.
So let me ask you this. Let's assume for a second that you have a tiny swath of the public who wants to identify as being Black when they're not Black, but it causes massive amounts of emotional distress to actual Black people. However, it doesn't cause so much emotional distress to Black people that they're willing to actually do away with themselves. What's the solution then?
Then I would say that we should include those people in the category of Blackness.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I was just genuinely curious about
because
that.
I mean,
that makes sense with
provide
your logic.
I mean, like,
well, I mean, how much can you reconfigure society in order to like fucking be beholden to like 6 people? You know what I mean? Like, how much of a society do you just want to completely fucking rearrange to be beholden to a few people? You know,
it depends on if the rearrangings are causing some harm, some detriment to society. I don't think that it necessarily harms society to start adopting different norms and practices that we haven't adopted, you know, in the past. I think that a lot of the times adopting new norms and practices and revising our concepts can be a good thing. And so how much should we revise society? Well, we should revise it as much as is needed to create the best possible society that produces the best possible consequences. Some categories should be revised toward that aim, and some shouldn't. Some are fine and valuable as they currently are. And I'm just sort of open about whether race is one of those things or not.
All right. I appreciate it very much. Appreciate you guys asking my questions. We're going to move on to callers. Peacecraft and Synth, you guys were here first, but before we get to that, Petrogard, it's your first time, I think, actually calling into the Crucible. So I'm going to skip you ahead of in the line and piss everybody else off because I think it's funny and it's my show. Go ahead with your question whenever you're ready.
Okay. Yeah. I got a question for both callers. Can you name any other preference or delusion where we completely rearrange the way in which we communicate with people in order to accommodate that person's preferred mental state? And is it good for them when we do it?
I would say no.
I mean, so there are cases that I think are sort of analogous to the trans case. I mentioned one of them earlier, which is like, you know, we to some extent revised the concept of a parent to include not just biological parents, but also people who wanted to be parents but couldn't. And we set up institutions of adoption and set up mechanisms through which people who want to be parents but biologically couldn't be parents can live out the role as a parent and be referred to as a parent and so on. So that's one thing we did. I think that was a good thing. Yeah, I think that case is uncontroversial.
That's also not a subjective state, though. It's not a subjective state to be a parent. So that wouldn't be a process of identity. That is you taking legal guardianship over someone. And so the utility of using parent makes sense. And there's no trade-off.
It's in virtue of playing certain roles, playing the sort of role of a parent, relating to the
child. So you
in
admit
the right
that transgenderism is playing the role of woman.
I haven't committed myself to that definition of womanhood.
With your logic.
But what's fun? Well, sure. But what I was pointing out there is that, like, on the construal, like you said, well, the meaningful difference is that that wasn't a case, or that was a case where all that's changing is they're sort of like adopting the social rules. But it's like, well, if that's what it takes for it to be a legit, or for the legitimate of the legitimacy, if that's what it takes for revising the category to be legitimate, then you should favor like a sort of social rule view. But I don't favor that sort of view. But my point is just that we revised a concept in a way that made people better off, and it was sort of uncontroversial, and it seems to have been a positive change for society.
But wouldn't you agree that adopting a child isn't so much of adopting a social role as it is taking on responsibilities?
It's adopting this, well, social roles and responsibilities, I think, come hand in hand. It's adopting a social role where you're relating in a certain way to a child, you're watching after it and so on. I would say that just straight up is a social role. There are also certain privileges that you get by being an adoptive parent. There are also, arguably certain privileges you can gain by being a trans woman, for example, having the right to certain surgeries and so on that might affirm your gender identity. So yeah, I don't think these are really disanalogies.
Okay, and then I guess as my follow-up question,
A
question to both of you: do you think it's better to eliminate people's discomfort and suffering and rob them of the opportunity to grow and become more than what they are today, or is it better to let them run away from that suffering?
So I think that growing and sort of developing your potentiality and so on, I take it that is constitutive of sort of well-being. That's part of what makes someone well off, is that they develop themselves in this way and so on. I think that not being sad and depressed is also constitutive of well-being. I think that getting, gender affirming therapies and so on definitely makes your well-being better off, and that it makes you less depressed, less likely to kill yourself and so on. It sounds like you're saying that there's this trade-off where in doing those surgeries, you also sort of decrease your well-being by stopping yourself from sort of growing and, developing your potentialities and so on. But I just don't see why your ability to do that is hindered if you become the other gender. You can still, engage in, creative activities and become who you have the potential to be and so on, just while being called a woman. I don't think that makes it any harder to do that.
I would argue it's the same reason that if you're unhappy with your actual life, living in an online game as a completely different entity, person and personality is not as beneficial as doing something about what you're uncomfortable with in your actual life.
So I guess I just don't see that. Again, we can quibble over empirics. I stated earlier that on my reading, and I can cite studies if that's needed, as it turns out, conversion therapy is not conducive towards the mental well-being and so on of trans people, whereas transitioning is.
In the short term or the long term? Because in the short term, playing video games is also a lot of fun rather than dealing with shitty things in your life.
Well, I mean, I would argue, I guess I don't know. So I would say that, so I would say that getting conversion therapy and so on just is a way in which you could deal with something in your life. You have this incongruence, it's causing you distress. As it turns out, the best way to deal with that distress in your language is to undergo these therapies and so on. So I guess I don't see the sort of equivalence where getting gender affirming therapies and so on is tantamount to not addressing certain problems in your life. But also with respect to the long-term or short-term question, we don't have many studies that are that long-term. But we do have studies on suicidality. Obviously, suicidality is an outcome that has long-term impacts. It's relevant to long-term considerations. As it turns out, according to the best available evidence that we have, transitioning decreases things like suicidality, whereas conversion therapy does not. In fact, increases suicidality. So yeah, that's how I'd respond to those statements, I guess.
And Petra, I have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much for the
Thanks,
call
man.
in. I appreciate it very much. And appreciate all your great support for the Crucible. Have a great night. Peacecraft, you've been waiting patiently in the background. Go ahead. Listen, you got to keep this at least somewhat brief. We got a bunch of callers tonight.
So I have a couple for my bestest friend to come, Ethan. And because I am an egalitarian, I also have a question for Lav. So, Ethan, before I ask you my series of questions, I wasn't able to catch all the debate. I had some errands to run. I would ask you super quickly, these aren't my questions. Are you a utilitarian or a consequentialist? Do you value harm reduction as a primary axiom? And are you religious?
One, I'm not religious. No, I'm not a utilitarian. I'm not a strict consequentialist either, but I have broadly consequentialist leaning intuitions, I'd say.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions for you, and I'll try to, because Andrew is a super big prick that makes me speed read, I will go as fast as I can. If you carve out all of the examples Lav has argued for, prisons, bathrooms, and sex delineated spaces, what positive outcomes, mitigating harm, do you expect to have left? It seems you are the greatest TERF ally that I have ever heard a trans rights activist be.
So there's a couple comments I would make about that. One is just that I haven't actually committed myself to the claims that trans women shouldn't be let into like women's spaces or like locker rooms or bathrooms or anything like that. I just said that thinking that they shouldn't be allowed to do those things is compatible with thinking that, broadly speaking, as a culture, as a society, we should refer to trans women as women, use she, her pronouns for them, etc. And also, I think that last thing that I said provides the answer to your first question, which is that, yeah, as it turns out, the things that trans people are interested in, the things that increase their well-being, isn't just restricted to like getting you to use the right prisons or getting you to use the right bathrooms. In fact, I think those are probably, most trans people, most trans activists would consider those relatively minor concerns. Much more meaningful things are like being able to transition, being called a woman and used she, her pronouns by the people around them, etc. And I think that the empirics sort of bear out that those have pretty big impacts on trans people's quality of life. So that's the sort of positive impact that I think is left over if you think trans women should be segregated from these spaces or whatever.
Okay, my second question goes like this. What is a pain unit? You hinged your argument initially with the Motte-Bailey of rights to then only swiftly switch to social grace, which you just did again. You hinged this argument on the concept of subjective pain. Can you describe to me a pain unit? What is a quantified measurement of pain? How can you know the harm I feel in being socially coerced to affirm someone is lesser or greater than the harm someone feels in not being affirmed? How did you come to the calculus that 0.0018% of the population feels more harm than 98.992% of the population? If harm prevention is an axiom of yours, how did you come to the mathematical calculus that x is greater than x plus 1?
Okay, so there's a few things. One is just like, how do you... So, I mean, it seemed like you were partially asking how you define pain, or maybe the point is just how do you define a unit of pain? I mean, we could broadly, I think, give a sort of conceptual analysis of pain where we say that pain just is like a state of consciousness that you desire not to be in when you experience it, or something like that. That's what a painful experience is. Or
so
like
I feel that.
I'm just trying to answer your questions.
I agree with that.
In terms of like, how do you define like a unit of pain?
Clarifying.
Okay.
I agree with you, and I'm saying I feel that exact same thing when individuals like you ask me to socially affirm.
Sure. So one thing is that, as I said, I'm not a strict consequentialist, so I'm not just doing the sort of crude utilitarian calculus. There are all kinds of things that influence like which pains are legitimate to be concerned about, which pains are not legitimate to be concerned about. I think that, for example, like sadistic pleasures shouldn't be counted the same as like innocent pleasures, things like that. And so I don't think that like the suffering that a bigot feels in having to sort of show respect to another person is as morally significant.
You don't want to go down this logic train. You don't. What is the definition?
Okay, well, I just did.
What is the definition? So hold
on, really quickly. Wait, I'm actually not done answering.
He's scrapped.
Your
Let
questions.
him finish.
You keep asking me questions, and then you said
I'll give you. Hang on. I'll give you a little bit more time, P scrap, but let him respond. That seems fair. Go ahead.
Enough.
Okay, so so you also said like, well, how do you judge when some person is feeling more pain than another people? Because that was a part of your question as well. And the point is, I don't think like, and this is similar to what I said to Lav earlier, which is that I don't think I have to give an exact specification of how you calculate these things in order to have like clear cases that fall that can be judged in a relatively clear-cut way. So, for example, I might not be able to look at everybody I see and tell how much, how many units of pleasure is this person feeling in this moment, but I can nonetheless look at a child getting ripped apart by an alligator and a man eating ice cream, and I can reasonably confidently say, I hope maybe you can as well, that the child is experiencing more pain than the man eating ice cream.
Well, you kind of buried the lead in there a little bit. I have to revisit this question. What is a bigot?
A bigot, I mean, someone who just broadly is in some sort, the way I was using it, I don't know if I would commit myself to like there being this general.
Would you commit yourself to any positive position during this debate?
What I meant when I said, okay, so would you stop interrupting me during this debate?
Probably not.
I've committed myself to several positive positions. I've committed myself to the position that we ought to refer to trans women as women. I've committed to the position that we ought to sponsor transitions for trans people, and that should be something that they're allowed to undergo, and that should be something that society pays for. I don't know, like I could go off listing all kinds of positive positions I've attributed to myself during this debate. As you said, you weren't listening. That's kind of evident from these comments.
No, I said I didn't listen to part of it. In the
okay,
response
so
that you had,
sort of weren't listening carefully then.
Actually, I took copious amounts of notes, but you let it slip. You let it slip a little bit.
You should try to work on comprehension a little bit.
Oh, sure. Anyways, what you did is you are presupposing off rip that anybody that doesn't agree with you is a bigot, which is why I asked you if you were religious in the opening question. You did. You can.
How did I say that?
You can rewind the VOD and watch.
I didn't even finish my. You interrupted me while I was giving my definition. What are you talking about?
I did. Andrew then clarified and asked me to let you finish. Right. What you've done is
I didn't get to finish my definition. That was you've interrupted me so many times. You're mixing up the different times you've interrupted me.
I haven't, but get used to it. You presupposed that you ought not respect the pain of an individual that you felt to be a bigot, which is really just.
That's actually not what I. That's actually not what I committed myself to.
Please respond.
I committed myself to
rewind the VOD. You can just. I can just talk over you. I'll just keep doing it.
Dude, we can't hear both of you at the same time. So hang on.
I'm just gonna start interrupting this guy because
hang on.
Did you just assume my gender bigot?
Yes, I did.
All right, but anyways, this isn't going anywhere.
No, I've got one.
Wrap it up quickly.
So let me just respond. So if you rewind the VOD, what you'll hear me saying is that I don't morally weigh sadistic pleasures or sadistic harms in the same way that I weigh innocent harms or innocent pleasures. Now, that is not equivalent to saying that I don't weigh any pleasures of sadistic people or any harms of generally sadistic people, because sadistic people can have non-sadistic pleasures or non-sadistic harms. And I think that those often should be weighed the same as anyone else's pleasure or harms. So those are just not equivalent statements.
One more clarifying this. If I refuse to affirm a trans person, am I being sadistic?
Yeah.
Oh,
well, I don't know if you'd be being sadistic, but you would be engaging in a moral act, and so like the harm that not engaging in that the harm that you would incur by not engaging in that immoral act, or the pleasure that you would incur, the harm that you would incur by engaging in that moral act, or the pleasure that you would incur by not engaging in that act, isn't weighed the same as more innocent pleasures, like the pleasure that you would receive from other people treating you with respect or something like that.
What if I feel it is immoral to lie? I'm not being sadistic, but I feel that I'm having the negative experience of being forced to lie. I'm not getting a courtesy, a joy, a jolly in punching down on a trans person, but I merely feel that I'm making an untrue statement and this causes me mental distress.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that you're just like exhibiting some sort of epistemic vice because you're just incorrect that you're being asked to lie. We've clarified this earlier. If you disagree, you can keep going.
I feel incorrectly that I'm being forced to lie?
Yes. You believe incorrectly that you're being forced to lie, yes.
But you don't respect that. So what if I felt I was being forced to lie and having to live a gender identity that I didn't identify with?
I don't understand. If you
I'm sure you don't.
If you're being forced, so you're saying, what if you feel like you're being forced to lie by living a gender identity?
Yes.
I would say that you're wrong in that case as well. It's not incorrect. Like you're not being forced. If you were forced to live as the gender identity that you don't identify with, you're not thereby being forced to affirm any false proposition. You would just be wrong.
So I would be wrong about my own gender identity?
No, that's. Can you like track what I'm saying? I feel like you're just not understanding. I didn't say
really
you'd be
feel
wrong
like
about your. I didn't say you'd be wrong about your gender identity. I said what you would be wrong about is the belief that if you were forced to live as the gender identity that you don't identify, that thereby you would be forced to affirm the truth of some proposition that is false. Right? Do you understand the difference between those statements, or do I need to help you more?
Oh, I think you're full of shit. But I have a third question.
Can you explain why, or you're just going to say that? Okay.
Yes,
fine.
because I drew the analogy.
This is male aggression.
We can move on to your next.
Lav, I know you're a woman. No. I'll clarify
move on to your
before
next
my third
confusion.
question. I'll clarify my.
Okay, I'll
before
respond
my
if you
third
want to clarify. Sure.
Not a problem. When I drew the analogy that you would disregard the harm I feel in attributing it to being sadistic, to which I then clarified and said, I'm not being sadistic. The mental anguish I feel is from a genuine belief that I'm being forced to lie. And you still said that you would disregard that and not weight that pain as being valuable. So then when I would say what you're doing is, I would say that basically I would still weigh it less because you're exhibiting some sort of epistemic vice, and then I think in your case, is there a real world, Ethan?
I think you're.
Is there a real world, Ethan?
But it wouldn't be it wouldn't be disweighted to the same extent that somebody who just does it because they like harming trans people would. So they would be the sort of weighting would change a little bit, but yeah, you would still be devalued a little bit because I think you're just willfully displaying epistemic vice that's leading you to the conclusion that you've arrived at.
Epistemic vice. Is there a real world, Ethan?
Yep.
So why would an adherence to the material reality in which we live be an epistemic vice?
I don't think that affirming that trans women are women contradicts empirical reality or material reality. Can you show me how it does?
Sure. I mean, you were absolutely using it when you didn't want to stick a position on your transracial arguments. You did it with your bald arguments.
Wait, what? I'm using what? I'm using what?
Well, actually, there's a spectrum. If I was to shave my head, but then the hair grew out a little bit, but then the hair grew out.
You think that there are vague classifications that means that I'm saying material reality doesn't exist? I don't understand.
No, I think
he's craft.
All right, last one. Andrew's going to cut me off. Last one. Additionally, for the benefit of everyone in YouTube, a majority of your arguments come from self-reported paid cohorts of population sizes less than 20. And with the repealing of Bergstrom, no attempt at repeatability, with 7 attempts, that study ended up in a retraction and a conclusion revision that transition carries no statistically relevant impact on suicidality. Lav is incorrect about Dijen, the study on transcriminality. But as far as the study you posted, while it is a non-repeated meta-analysis of a self-interested cohort, the studies you measured are about the treatment of gender identity disorder, striking against your claims of the validity of self-ID. Your interpretation of the data is incorrect. What we seem to see is that there is a temporary bump in euphoric feeling that lasts about 2 to 3 years, and then a swift drop-off. The comorbidities. I'm not gonna. No, you posted a listicle. You posted a fucking PowerPoint slide. You didn't post a fucking paper.
You could. Okay.
But please don't interrupt me.
I was very confused. No, I'm going to interrupt you.
No, I don't care.
So I guess what's confusing me is that you said that you were addressing studies that I'd posted. You're addressing studies that I didn't post? What do you think the point of that is?
Because often during the course of the debate, you've appealed to the plurality of data, this amount of data, the
When
data
did I say that? I said the best available data, and then I posted what I thought was the best available data, and now you're addressing data that I didn't say was the best available data.
So the best available data you have is a PowerPoint slide?
It's not
non-repeatable?
Okay. The link that I sent. Okay, you can search the title of the study. I can't believe you're like this inept. You can search the title of the study. It'll take you to the full paper.
So why didn't you So why didn't you post the paper instead of the PowerPoint slide?
This is just the link that I had on hand.
Regardless, in your closing, you've appealed to the trusting of medical healthcare decisions of doctors. If so, do you somehow disagree with the NHS and Sweden, two state-run nationalized healthcare systems that have reversed their standard of care on trans individuals?
Yeah, so there's a lot of states that have kind of looked at this issue. So like, for example, in Finland, they conducted a systematic review. Physicians are told by the Council for Choices in Healthcare that psychosocial support is the first-line treatment for adolescent gender dysphoria, but they also say that hormonal interventions may be considered before reaching adulthood in those with firmly established transgender identities, but it must be done with a great deal of care. The Dutch have also done a well-known established protocol for the treatment of gender dysphoria. Essentially, according to that protocol,
I didn't ask
labeled-
about those countries. I asked about Sweden and the NHS.
Okay, why should I value what Sweden and the NHS says over what these other countries say and what my read of the literature says? I just have to automatically defer because there was like a couple countries.
Why are you demonstrating an epistemic vice?
I'm not demonstrating an epistemic vice. What's the epistemic vice I'm demonstrating? It's also worth noting that in Sweden, physicians treating children and adolescents with gender dysphoria in Sweden, right, which conducted a national systematic review of the literature, were told by the National Board of Health and Welfare that, quote, the risks of puberty suppressing treatment with GnRH analogs and gender affirming hormonal treatment currently outweigh the possible benefits, but treatments should be offered in exceptional cases, right? So like none of these countries that have done these systematic reviews have said that there can never be a trans kid who should get this. It's just, oh, we should be a bit more cautious. Maybe the threshold should be a bit higher in terms of when we give these treatments and so on. But I'm also interested, like, what epistemic vice am I?
No, I'd like you to clarify that. I'd like you to clarify that.
Enough. You've had your allotment of time. Thank you very much for the call in, Peacecraft. I appreciate it. Synth, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
What's up? How's it going? Sure. I've got a question for both of them, I think. Fimoid first. The question I've got for you is there a single argument you think you've made in this entire discussion that you don't think that Ethan had a response for?
I think that he had responses for my arguments. I don't think that they were adequate or enough to change my mind.
Well, if you just tell me which one you thought was like inadequate, that would work too.
Like how we should, like, I think there was a lot of confusion, or not confusion, but like disalignment with me saying that like gender roles should not be given merit, or Ethan seems to think that we can live in this fantasy without any sort of repercussions to women. So yeah, I thought that his arguments for that were insufficient, and he seems to think
Which of his arguments is that you're referring to?
Did you watch the debate?
I did. I'm asking you which argument you thought Ethan made that wasn't high quality.
I'm pretty sure that I just...
No, you just said the position you held. I'm asking what's the argument Ethan made that you thought wasn't high quality?
Ethan, remind me what you said about in response to...
No, that answers my question. And my question for Ethan is, are you going to stand by your debate bro shtick and debate me on your stream, Ethan?
I'll stand by my... Yeah. Hopefully I won't get shit canned, but I'll try my best.
All right, you have a good one. Peace.
Yeah, peace out.
Have a good night, Synth. Looks like Meep is here. Did you have a question?
Yeah, did I sound okay?
Yeah, you sound fine.
Okay. Lav, I've been tuning in and out, so correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't you say earlier in the debate that you shouldn't have to have your taxes go towards trans surgery and stuff like that because you think it violates your freedom of speech, correct?
No, not because I think it violates my freedom of speech. It just doesn't make sense for me to pay for a cosmetic procedure. Okay,
so that works too. Do you think that might be the case in the case of, like, let's say someone has like a major injury that like a victim of like a bunch of fires when that it damages their skin very harshly? Do you think if it improved their life, you should?
Dude, listen. You got to slow down. You have to slow down.
Oh,
okay. So start over. Maybe you're nervous. I don't know.
I get it. I understood it.
All right.
I understood it.
Sorry.
I think that emergency surgery should be covered with my tax dollars. But if they want to get a surgery to like look better, no.
All right. Okay. Thank you for letting me ask my question. I apologize for speaking fast.
No, you're
fine. Well, no, it's not the problem. I have to understand what you're saying. Right?
No, I got you. I just I naturally don't like that. Sorry.
All right. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for the call in. Now, guys, you've been here for over 2 hours. We're just going to do the super chats, and I'll let you both get on your way. Going back, let's see, where are we at here? Simping Snoop sends in $5 and says, Miss Lovely Lav, what the hell is with the music videos?
I was a musician for a long time. Those are my work. That's also when I was 20 pounds heavier, and now I'm immortalized as being chubby, which is super fun. I wish I would have had a music career now when I'm at my peak. when I'm at my peak. 25, fertile, beautiful and thin.
For $4 from Circle G says, do you have to consciously believe that you're retarded to present as a retard? Oh, God. Okay. $33.33 from Anonymous. He just says, Ibel. My chatbot has been fucking up and spamming Ibel for the last couple of shows, and I'm just going to let it. Fuck it. $10 comes in from Jim Bob. He says, Ethan, you said a woman is defined by socially accepted norms. If the most socially accepted norm for being a woman is the ability to give birth, why ought we reject that norm and replace it with a definition that isn't the norm?
Well, because basically I think that, so like if what you're saying is like, well, our current definition of a woman, the most important roles associated with being a woman are these things, and this would exclude trans people. I mean, I think basically because the sort of ordinary like concepts that we have, right? The sort of ordinary definitions that we have and the sort of roles that we happen to associate with certain terms like womanhood and so on, like those are the definitions that we currently have and the connotations that we currently have. But I don't think that that's any reason to believe that that's like the best definition that this term could have, or that that's the best criteria that this term could have. Like, I would just say that basically the reason is that if I were to say that that's the criteria for being a woman is filling out that role, that would be exclusive of trans people. And I'm saying I think our definition should be inclusive of trans people, because a definition that's inclusive of trans people is better for their well-being. It meaningfully helps them. In significant ways. So yeah, that's the basic reason.
$5 comes in from Petrogard. He called in. I do appreciate that. He says, note, you don't got to read this one on stream, but you can laugh at it. We indulged. Oh, no. We indulged a man pretending to be a woman for years in the White House, and look where we are now. That's kind of funny. $4 from Prestige Worldwide. I can picture... let me vet this one real quick too. Hang on. Holy shit. Yeah, can't read that one. Prestige Worldwide. Sorry. $7.77 comes in from Jack Gallant. Says, these two are so far off the narrow road of truth that it'd be troubling if I didn't have a clear what is he saying here? Oh, eschatology warning me of the coming tidal wave of these types of empty husks. So yeah, okay. Do you guys want to respond to that?
Slay.
I'm sure neither of you probably have any sort of eschatology at all. So yeah, probably not. Okay. $20 comes in from Bernie Alltime. He says, great work and have a good evening. That's it. Not that many were directed, other than, you know, kind of a little bit maybe of chin shots here and there. But I think by and large, people enjoyed the debate. Before I let you guys go, though, I'm not going to let you leave without telling everybody where they can find you. We'll start with you, Femoid. Go ahead.
Like I said earlier, I just released my first YouTube video essay. It's about gender. And please go watch it. It had 2,000 views, and then I had to take it down because we had audio issues, and so now it's sitting under 500, and it's embarrassing. It's been up for over 2 hours. Please go watch it so I don't kill myself in a video game. Please, 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 please. I'm being a shill. Please watch it. Please watch it. I don't want to go back to OnlyFans. Please don't make me go back to OnlyFans. Yeah, Femoid on everything. Femoid fan account on Twitter. I mean, just kidding. That's a fan account. That's not me. And Lord Voldemort on TikTok.
All right. Appreciate that very much. Ethan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would refer everybody to my Twitter. I recently started a campaign to get Lav's video flagged, so she has to go back to OnlyFans. Yeah, so I guess that's what I would instruct everybody to do.
All right. Well, don't. Obviously, he's joking. Don't go and flag somebody's fucking channel. That's fucked up. Obviously, you are joking, right, Ethan?
I'm joking.
Okay, he's joking. Just just in case there's some nutter butters out there who are watching, he's fucking kidding. Anyway, appreciate it very much, guys. Have yourselves a fine and wonderful evening. Take care. Okay, so what's coming up? Friday, we have a big debate coming up between me and I don't know, some TikTok chick. I don't know, I don't pay attention, right? But it's going to be a good one. It's going to be on where rights for women come from. I'm looking forward to it. Actually, Alex PWF He'll be dual hosting that debate. It'll be here on the Crucible and on his channel at the same time. He enjoys doing those dual casts, and I'm fine with that as well. We've always had a good working relationship with that channel, even though they're a bunch of fucking degens. Alex has always been a pretty straight shooter with me, so don't mind doing those kind of dual streams. Lastly, we have a whole ton of great content coming up for you next week as well. We have another debate this Sunday, so just going to keep on going. We should have this channel monetized maybe within hours. So we appreciate it very much. Appreciate all the great support from all of us here at the Crucible to all of you out there in Ibel land. Ibel. I just got to leave the fucking bots. Got to say Ibel. Like, I'll still make the bot say all the shit it's supposed to say, but it'll just randomly say Ibel, and only we'll know what the fuck it's about, right? That's lore now, right? That's lore. So from all of us here at the Crucible to all of you out there in fucking Ibel land, have a wonderful night. Ibel shall live forever. Ibel is the demigod that we pray to. Ibel is. Ibel. What the fuck is Ibel? How did this even happen?